Um, Ryan, Lizza, thank you very, very much for doing this. And
My
welcome to
pleasure.
what has been a very busy first few days on Substack. Um,
Well, thank
for
you for
you.
having me. You've been doing this a while, so hopefully you will impart some wisdom to me about how to be successful on here, Vicky.
Well, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out, Ryan. And we were just talking before we went live. I mean, how we market our Substacks has changed a lot in the last 4 years, and now that sort of the importance of community on this platform has become very important, I think, to all of us. And I want to talk about that. But I would
Yeah.
be remiss if I didn't kick off and ask you, so what has happened in this saga with a lawyer at Politico coming after you after writing your first newsletter?
Yeah, it's for viewers that I'll try and give the quick summary of the story. I launched telos.news on Monday, telos.news. It's a Substack-based publication to cover the Trump administration, and we're going to really focus like a laser beam on the weaponization of government and all of the myriad issues that relate to that. So please check us out, telos.news. And the first day I wrote a piece, and it was a piece about why I left Politico. It was a piece about some criticism of the coverage at places like Politico, but not just Politico. I mean, political media in general right now during the current
Mhm.
crisis in Washington. And that night, I got a couple of urgent phone messages from a number I didn't recognize, and then a sort of garbled message that didn't quite come through fully. But what did come through is the word violation, and you need to take it down immediately. And I thought, take what down? And then a few minutes later, 20 minutes later, I got a letter from the top lawyer at Politico, a billion-dollar company owned by a
Yeah.
foreign conglomerate named Axel Springer. And they, a news organization, demanded that I delete an 1,800 word piece criticizing media coverage of the Trump administration. And most of this piece was frankly about the law firm Paul Weiss and
Yeah.
how how ironically, the piece was about how Paul Weiss had erased from their own websites important parts of their own history and important biographical information about their own lawyers. So a piece about Paul Weiss memory holing their own history under pressure from the Trump administration. I was pressured then by Politico to memory hole the entire piece. I obviously didn't do that. I told them I'm not going to. And they haven't doubled down on that request.
Did you know the lawyer? Had you had any dealings with the lawyer who wrote to you about this?
I did. I know Meredith, and I was involved in a defamation lawsuit from my time at Esquire that carried over into my time at Politico. And, there was some, when I had to go into a deposition or something like that, I coordinated with Meredith actually about making sure I had representation in case any political questions came up. And I thought she did a good job, was very strong in sort of having my back through that kind of complicated experience. So I know her, but lawyers are lawyers. Meredith's client is Politico, not me. So it's nothing personal between the two of us. But I
No.
did write to them a letter which I published at telos.news, where I said I was frankly, on a personal level, was shocked and appalled that a news organization would try and enforce boilerplate language in a non-disparagement clause by having an entire article removed. And I asked them, why don't you tell me specifically the exact sentences that you think are problematic, and we can go from there. And they never responded.
They never responded.
No.
Yeah, that must have. I'm assuming that was completely unanticipated, obviously, by you. Yeah.
Yeah, because this was not disparagement. This was the most, this was talking about what's going on in the world right now. and what's going on in Washington. And if I couldn't talk about
Right.
press coverage of the Trump administration, which is inevitably going to include places where I've formerly worked. That's just how
Yeah.
Washington is. There's only a few big
But,
news
and you've
organizations.
worked at quite a lot of places. That's the other point by
Yeah,
now. You know,
exactly. And I'm sure buried in something I signed at every one of those places was some kind of language. And so, as I said in the letter, their argument is that I can never criticize Politico in perpetuity, which is just absurd. And disparagement is, belittling, and it's
yeah.
a little closer to defamation. And I didn't disparage them, and it's absurd, even if I had, for them to request that an entire 1,800-word article, including tons of criticism of the Trump administration, be removed. I mean, the position they put themselves in is basically going to bat for the White House and trying to have a journalist's criticism of the Trump White House removed, which to me is not a comfortable position for a news organization to be in. And
Well,
Vicky, last thing I'll say is, speaking of comfortable positions, I am scheduled to attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday as a guest of Politico. So this has all kind of put me in a somewhat awkward spot.
then what are you going to do? You know, Substack, we are having a rival dinner. I will be there on Saturday night. I'm
What do you
sure
think?
that is an option.
Should I go to that instead?
I think the word on the street is that is going to be the place to be.
All right. Well, let's talk offline.
Yeah,
And,
we'll talk offline about that.
maybe that's a better option.
Well, you heard it here first. So Ryan, but let me go back to actually what was in that first newsletter of yours about Paul Weiss, and it is interesting. You know, you reported how these biographies of these attorneys who had done great work had been removed by Paul Weiss. And why do you think Politico would not have published that story? I mean, that struck me as very interesting.
I want to be very clear, and I hope it was not confusing in that first article. I was not saying that they wouldn't publish it. What I said in one line was, I talked about my reaction to reading that. And what I said was that, frankly, doing the reporting of the on that Paul Weiss drama is, for me, sort of like my moment of extreme clarity of what the hell is going on in Washington and what the Trump administration is doing. And maybe it's because I'm a writer, but there was something about looking at the specific language from the Internet Archive and the current version of these biographies, and frankly, Paul Weiss's own history, this extremely proud history of standing up for the little guy for decades. And the fact that they had to, just memory hole that stuff, I found it kind of frightening. And that's not, you can't really,
yeah, I think you mentioned you quoted 1984 by George Orwell. It's exactly right.
I think I said that was some 1984 level shit. I mean, we can exaggerate and be dramatic about stuff, but this is this really does compare to that in some ways. And the point I was making is not that I submitted something or asked Politico to publish anything on that subject. There was no spiking of the article or anything like that. It was that I knew, as a writer covering what's going on right now in Washington, Politico wasn't the place for me to do that kind of stuff anymore, because that's not the genre of or style of writing that they publish.
Right.
So that's
it's a culture question.
It's a culture question, and it just really hit home for me some of the weaknesses in the mainstream political reporting in Washington, where a lot of institutions and reporters wish it were 2014. They wish it were Republicans and Democrats having good faith arguments, and presidents, when they cross a line, are held accountable, sometimes even by their own party. And, the net on the tennis court is actually up, and there are, refs on the umpires on the sidelines. And we're not in that moment. And the actors, the bad faith actors, are taking advantage of the journalistic practices that are somewhat outdated now, and holding us to standards that and rules that they don't live by. And our own sort of traditions are sort of being weaponized against us, because we get put into this position of constantly any criticism, any investigative reporting is met with arguments about whataboutism and bad faith. And I think news organizations have been insanely slow, not everyone, but quite a few, to adapt to the changed circumstances of one party control in Washington, a
Mm.
party that has deep, deep anti-democratic problems right now, and is, the source of a crisis. And we're not in a situation where we have, two parties that are, both responsible
Yeah.
for the current crisis, and we have to adapt to that and be very, very clear-eyed about that.
I mean, I agree 100%. What I debated with Michael Wolff, who was on here a couple of weeks ago, as to whether or not this Trump administration is more organized than the last Trump administration. He said, no, it's chaos as usual. My sources tell me that's not necessarily quite true. There is some of the infighting that there was last time, but it's not as pronounced, not least because Jared and Ivanka aren't there. But I'm curious, what's your feeling about that? What are you hearing?
I didn't see this, but I could very much imagine what Michael was saying, and I think both things can be true.
Right.
In that, um, the I think what's very obvious, and this is not stating anything that you don't know, is that they came in this time with a plan, and they
Yes.
came in this time with a staffing plan that makes things very, very different, right? So you have MAGA Trump loyalists in all of the key positions. You have each agency and department from top to bottom being combed over and looking for anyone who's disloyal to the president, right down to the questionnaires for new employees. And so that is very, very different than last time. It's just a whole scale effort to control thousands of government workers and or fire them. Right now, given that, you might have lots of chaos, especially with this whole amateur class of folks coming in, and lots of debate between those. I mean, we know that Elon Musk is fighting all the time with cabinet secretaries, right? Who might resent the Doge children coming in there and mucking around in their departments. They want to fuck up their departments on their own. They don't want Elon and then the kids coming in doing it. So I think both can be true. Massive infighting, chaos, but also a whole culture of loyalty that wasn't there previously.
Yes. Very interesting. And if you were to play snakes and ladders with who is
Wait,
really...
what is it? Snakes and ladders. This is some kind of Britishism that I do.
Oh my God, is that snakes and ladders not a thing in this country?
Well,
It's a board game.
Right, shoot. Well, why did we call it Shoots and Ladders?
Well,
Or am I crazy?
okay. All right. Well, that you know something? I've really learned something new in the last 5 minutes. So I'm curious as to who you think really has the most influence. I know conventional wisdom always says, well, it's the last person who spoke to President Trump. But I am really struck, and again, I was talking to Andrew Weissman, the lawyer, yesterday, by some of the language that's being used by Stephen Miller. And I was also really struck on Signalgate, that it was, at the end of the day, you had J.D. Vance, you had Mike Waltz, you had a whole host of people saying this, that, and the other, but the person who shut them all down was, at the end of the day, Stephen Miller. And it's been Stephen Miller who's been publicly very aggressive about the Venezuelans and Mr. Garcia. So, I mean, what's your thought on that?
I don't disagree with you at all. And I think among the most newsworthy things in the famous Jeff Goldberg Signal chat was exactly as you point out, the way that just mentioning Stephen Miller's name or him, everyone realizing that he had weighed in, just changed the tenor of the conversation. So to me, it's some of the best, and there's been reporting in the Times and elsewhere that backs up that view about the level of his influence. He's very public, as you probably notice. He's on Fox News, quite a bit. Doing these kind of theatrical. He to me, I mean, not to be too sarcastic about this, but he almost plays like a cartoon version of I don't know if you've watched any of these appearances. They're really worth watching. I saw him on Laura Ingraham last night or the night before, and just almost like a cartoon villain, like he's playing this thing to the camera, making these extreme declarative statements. So he's both the public face of MAGA, and we know from the Signal Gate that people seem to be, tremble when his name is mentioned in a way that I don't think J.D. Vance has that kind of juice. And he's thought, he's so much of Trump is like instinct, right? Like since 2015, it's just been a set of like random ideas, and the last decade in the Republican Party has been these entrepreneurs, these policy entrepreneurs trying to take that stuff and give it shape. And Stephen Miller has been one of the leaders on that.
And talk to me, I mean, again, because, you've covered now how many administrations? A lot.
I go back to the Wilson administration, Vicky. Now, I got to Washington during the Clinton administration. I'll never forget, because the first week I was here was the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, and
Wow.
so in